A tear in reality splits the void above a dead space station. A man falls through, his body glitching between solid form and shimmering static. He is an interdimensional drifter, and he has just crashed into a universe that should not exist. The coordinates were wrong. This is not his home. His very presence here is a paradox, a violation of cosmic law that triggers a desperate fight for survival. By the end of this story, you will witness one man's impossible choice that could save all of reality or erase it forever. What remains of the station's crew was slaughtered by something that moves through walls. Now that same force has detected a new anomaly, him. What would you do if you were the only stranger in a hostile cosmos? His boots echoed on the cold grating, a solitary drumbeat in the oppressive silence. Kaelen, the interdimensional drifter, moved with a predator's caution, his senses stretched to their limits. The air tasted of ozone and old blood. Around him, the station was a graveyard of metal and frozen corpses, each crew member cut down in a posture of frantic flight. They had not been shot or stabbed, they seemed to have been unmade. His own body still hummed with the dissonance of his violent arrival, a wrong note in the symphony of this reality. He was an intruder here, and the universe was keenly aware of it. Tucked into the stiff fingers of a fallen technician, he found it. A single data pad, its screen casting a sickly green glow across the dead man's face. It displayed a single line of text repeating in an endless, desperate loop. They are coming through the walls. The words were not just a warning, they were a key. The signal's origin point was traced to the station's core, deep within the labyrinthine structure. To follow it was to walk directly into the jaws of the very horror that had cleansed this place of life. But a drifter survives on leads, on echoes, on the faint whispers of causality. This signal was the only thread in the entire dark tapestry that was not broken. With a ghostly message as his guide, Kaelen moved deeper into the station's dark heart, each step a conscious choice to meet a fate he had just witnessed in grisly detail. What else could he do? To stand still was to be found, to move forward was to hunt. The bulkhead ahead of him dissolved into a shimmering curtain of light. It was not an opening, but a violation, the solid metal wavering like a heat mirage before something stepped through. The entity had no fixed shape, its form a swirling mosaic of faces, places, and moments that were not its own. It was a tapestry woven from stolen memories, a predator made of phased energy that flowed through the station's bones as if they were air. A cold that had nothing to do with temperature washed over Kaelen as its attention focused on him. "You do not belong here." The voice was not a sound that traveled through the air, but a thought forced directly into his mind, a chorus of 1,000 dead whispers speaking as one. He threw himself backward, his shoulder slamming against a console as a tendril of shimmering energy lashed out where he had stood. It did not seek to cut or burn, but to absorb. He could feel the pull of it, a vacuum against his very soul, an imperative to become just another flickering image in its horrific collage. This was no alien invader. This creature was a native, a product of this universe's fundamental instability. It was a cleaner, erasing anomalies to preserve a fragile, broken reality. And he was the greatest anomaly of all. His own glitching form was a beacon, a siren call that had drawn it straight to him. To fight it directly was impossible. You could not punch a ghost. You could not outrun something that moved through walls. Survival now depended on a more fundamental understanding. What rules governed a being that treated solid matter as a suggestion? How do you outsmart a hunter that can see the very fabric of your existence as a stain? Kaelen did not fight the creature. He fled, his mind racing faster than his feet. A drifter's survival relies on understanding the rules of a new reality, not just its physics but its logic. This entity was a paradox, a being of pure information that treated solid matter as a suggestion. It hunted by sensing the dissonance of things that did not belong. His own glitching form was a beacon, but perhaps that same instability could be a key. He needed a system that could see the world as he did, a perspective that could map the ghost in the machine. He found it in the station's command nexus. The central AI core was a mangled wreck of shattered crystal and sparking conduits, but a faint power signature still flickered deep within its heart. He pressed his palm against a cracked interface panel, ignoring the sharp edges biting into his skin. He did not use a command code. He simply opened his mind, allowing his own cross-dimensional perception to bleed into the system. The connection was a shock of pure chaos. A torrent of corrupted data and dying logic screamed through his consciousness. For a moment, he was lost in the station's final, terrified moments. Then a single, coherent thought emerged from the noise: query, identity. The words were a weak, stuttering signal, the last gasp of a dying intelligence. A traveler, Kaelen thought back, pushing the concept with his mind. I am a traveler. I need a way out of this place. The response was slow, a cascade of failing memory banks. Accessing log Project Chimera, the station was not a victim of a random attack. It was the source. They were researchers studying the theoretical boundaries between dimensions. They believed they could create a stable, microscopic rift, just a window to peer through, but their calculations were flawed. They did not open a window. They tore a hole, and something looked back. The log called them phantoms. They were not invaders from another world, but a fundamental force from the void between realities. They were the universe's white blood cells drawn to the infection of the rift, and they began cleansing the anomaly. They started with the crew. The AI's final, broken message was clear. The phantoms are not evil, they are a function. They exist to erase mistakes, and you, traveler, are the biggest mistake of all. The station's core, the origin point of the original tier, was now their nest. It was the one place in this dead station that still thrummed with unstable power. To escape, Kaelen would have to walk into the heart of the hive. The engineering bay was a fortress of humming machinery and barricaded doors, a pocket of defiant order in the surrounding chaos. Kaelen found the entrance sealed, a heavy plasma torch wedged into the mechanism. He phased his hand through the metal, the action sending painful shivers up his arm, and dislodged it from the inside. The door slid open with a tortured shriek. A figure stood silhouetted against the glow of a primary power conduit, a heavy wrench held like a club. Her eyes were wide, her knuckles white, but her aim was steady. "You are not one of them," she stated, her voice raspy from disuse. Kaelen let his own form glitch for a fraction of a second, the air around him buzzing with static. "No," he admitted, lowering his hands in a slow, deliberate motion. "I am something worse. I am lost." Her name was Lyra, the station's last surviving systems engineer. She had been running silent for days, using the bay's localized power grid to mask her life signs from the phantoms. Her knowledge of the station was intimate, a map etched into her memory. His existence defied every law of physics she held dear, but she was a pragmatist. A ghost who can walk through walls might be the only key to escaping a station full of them, she reasoned, her weapon finally lowering. Their pact was tense, an alliance of pure necessity. He could perceive the dimensional fractures they created, the faint scars in reality they left behind as they moved. She could interpret the station's failing schematics, identifying weak points in the structure and potential power sources. He was the sensor and she was the guide. Their first goal was simple: get to the core. Lyra believed she could trigger a containment protocol, a localized energy surge that might, for a few precious seconds, force the phantoms back into their native state. But to do that, they needed to reach the heart of the storm. Could a woman who trusted only in solid mechanics and a man who was barely solid at all possibly trust each other enough to survive? The reactor chamber was a cathedral of silent, malevolent energy. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through the deck plates, a sound felt in the bones more than heard with the ears. The air itself shimmered, thick with phantom static that made the hair on Lyra's arms stand on end. Before them, the primary reactor core was no longer a piece of machinery. It was a pulsating heart of wrongness, its protective housing now a translucent shell revealing a swirling vortex of stolen memories and agonized faces. This was the source, the nest, and they needed to wake it up. Lyra's hands flew across her portable terminal, her face illuminated by its frantic glow. The emergency restart sequence requires a manual overload of the secondary conduits. The radiation and phase energy in there will shred anything organic. It is a suicide run. Kaelen watched the chaotic dance inside the core, his own form stuttering in sympathy. He could feel the phantom presence like a pressure against his mind, a chorus of lost voices demanding he join them. Staying here is slower suicide, he countered, his voice calm despite the dissonance screaming through his cells. He met her horrified gaze for a single second, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Then he stepped through the containment field. The moment he crossed the threshold, the world dissolved into pain. It was not a physical burning, but a deeper, more fundamental unraveling. Every cell in his body screamed in protest as the ambient phase energy tried to pull him apart, to absorb his unique signature into the collective horror. His form flickered violently, a candle in a hurricane. He fought to hold his pattern together, focusing on the memory of solid ground, of a single, stable point in the infinite sprawl of the multiverse. Each step was a battle of wills. He moved toward the override panel, a simple lever encased behind a cracked viewport. The distance felt like 1,000 miles. A phantom tendril, drawn by his intense struggle, lashed out from the core. It was not an attack, but an invitation, a promise of an end to the painful struggle of being a singular self. For a terrifying moment, the offer was seductive, to let go, to become part of the silent, timeless whole. Then he saw Lyra, a small, solid figure braced in the doorway, her face a mask of terror and determination. She was real, she was an anchor. With a final, agonizing effort, he phased his hand through the viewport and slammed the lever home. Alarms blared to life, a shocking, mundane sound in the supernatural silence. The reactor core flared with blinding white light, and for one perfect, stable second, every phantom in the chamber winked out of existence. The silence in the corridor was absolute, broken only by the low hum of a failing power conduit. Lyra worked at the security panel, her tools a soft scrape of metal on metal. Kaelen stood watch, his back to her, his senses cast out into the oppressive stillness. Then, as his glitching hand passed near the door's magnetic seal, the world tore in two. The sterile metal walls dissolved into a memory of fire and screaming wind. He was back there, on the bridge of his own world's last great ship. The sky outside the viewport was not black, but a bleeding, impossible orange as reality itself came unstitched. He saw the faces of his crew, not frozen in terror like the station's dead, but looking to him, their captain, for a salvation he could not provide. The memory was a physical blow, a phantom pain sharper than any wound. He had calculated the jump, a desperate gamble to outrun the end. He had succeeded only in watching his entire universe, his every memory and moment, collapse into a silent, hungry void behind him. He was not a survivor, he was a ghost, the sole remainder of a cosmic equation that had reached zero. "I will not fail this time." The words were a low, raw whisper, spoken not to Lyra but to the ghosts he carried with him. The vow settled in his chest, cold and hard as iron. This was no longer just about escape. The station's rift was a mirror of the cataclysm he had fled, a smaller, slower version of the same universal cancer. To run again would be to condemn another reality to the same silent death he had already witnessed. He had to seal the breach. He had to cauterize this wound in the cosmos, not for redemption, but because he was the only one who had seen the terminal diagnosis and lived to recognize the symptoms. The security door hissed open, pulling him back to the present. Lyra glanced at him, her eyes narrowing at the new, grim set of his jaw. "What changed?" she asked. He just shook his head and stepped through the doorway. Some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed, but he was going to try. The psychic pressure grew with every step, a weight that pressed not on their bodies but on their minds. It was no longer a random chorus of dead whispers. It was a singular, focused thought broadcast from the very walls around them. "The drifter is the key." The words slithered into Kaelen's consciousness, each syllable a shard of ice. "He is the door, and we are the key." Lyra stumbled, clutching her head. "They are talking," she gasped, her voice strained. "They are talking about you. They are not just hunting you, Kaelen. They need you." The revelation was a seismic shift, turning the station from a haunted house into a deliberate trap. He was not a refugee hiding from a storm. He was the eye of the storm itself. The phantoms were not mindless predators. They were a collective intelligence, a hive mind of phased energy that perceived reality as a single, flawed equation. His arrival was not an anomaly to be erased. It was a variable they had been waiting for. His unique nature, his ability to bridge dimensions, made him a living conduit, a doorway they could use to expand their cleansing function across the entire multiverse. Every phantom he had encountered, every attack had been a test, a probe to understand the mechanism of his existence. "You are a tool," the whispers insisted, their tone flat and utterly certain. "Your instability is a perfect catalyst. You will help us correct the flaw." To them, the infinite variations of reality were a sickness, a cacophony of errors. They were the cure, and he was the delivery system. The war was not for territory or resources. It was a war of definition, a conflict over what reality was allowed to be. And Kaelen, the last son of a dead universe, had just been promoted from casualty to central figure. The choice was no longer about survival. It was about which universe, if any, would get to exist at all. The station shuddered around him, a deep, groaning tremor that was nothing like the ethereal hum of the phantoms. This was raw, physical violence. A series of concussive roars echoed from the distant starboard sector, followed by the shriek of tearing metal. Emergency lights flickered and died, plunging the corridor into a deeper darkness. Lyra had done it. She had turned the station's own heart into a weapon, overloading the secondary power grid in a brilliant, desperate act of sabotage. Her final words hung in the sudden silence of his comms unit, a void more profound than any he had crossed. "Don't be late." There was no fear in her voice, only a grim and absolute finality. She had not just created a diversion. She had offered herself as the bait, a brilliant, noisy flare in the dark to draw the hunters away from their true prey. Him, the psychic pressure that had been a constant weight in his mind, vanished. The chorus of whispers pulled toward the new, catastrophic anomaly she had created. The path to the rift generator was clear. It was a gift bought with a life, and he could not afford to waste a single second of the time she had bought him. He ran, his form glitching with every step, not from pain now, but from a frantic, burning urgency. The corridor walls blurred past, scarred and frozen. He was a ghost running through a graveyard, guided by the memory of a woman who had trusted in solid things, and who had sacrificed everything for a man who was not entirely there. The generator chamber lay ahead, its doors sealed by emergency protocols. He did not slow down. He phased through the reinforced alloy, the transition a sharp, cold shock. Inside, the air crackled with the raw power of a bleeding universe. The rift generator was not a machine in any conventional sense. It was a wound held open by brutal force, a swirling maw of fractured light and color that pulsed like an infected heart. This was the source of the station's doom, the tear in reality the researchers had mistakenly created. And according to the AI's final log, it was also the only thing that could send him home. To stand before it was to stand on the edge of oblivion. The energy pouring from it was chaotic, wild, a storm of possibilities that threatened to unravel him on the spot. He could feel the pull of 1,000 different realities, a siren song of escapes, but Lyra's sacrifice had changed the calculation. This was not just about finding a door anymore. It was about closing this one forever. He reached out a hand not to step through, but to touch the source code of the catastrophe. The fate of 2 souls, and perhaps all souls, now hinged on a choice made in a silent room at the end of all things. The rift generator was a monstrous sculpture of wires and light, a chaotic web of energy holding a hole in the world open by sheer force. It dominated the laboratory, its core a silent, screaming vortex of stolen colors and impossible geometries. A single data terminal flickered beside it, and as Kaelen approached, a final log began to play. The lead scientist's voice was thin, stripped of all hope. "We were wrong," it said, the words crackling with static. "The rift is not a bridge, it is a siphon. It does not just connect universes, it consumes them layer by layer. Every moment it remains open, it draws energy from the realities it touches, unraveling them to fuel its own existence." Kaelen's own glitching form was a testament to that consumption. He finally understood the true horror. The phantoms were not the cause of the disaster. They were merely the symptom, the immune response to this gaping, hungry wound in reality. The station's crew had not been killed by invaders. They had been the first course in a feast that was still ongoing. His original plan, to use the generator as a doorway, was a death sentence. Stepping through it would not send him home. It would simply add his entire native reality, the last fading echo of his dead universe, to the menu. He was not looking at an escape hatch. He was staring into the gullet of the very thing that had devoured his world. The choice was made for him. He had to destroy it. To sever this cosmic parasite, he would have to seal his only known path home, stranding himself forever in a universe that was actively trying to erase him. The irony was a cold, sharp blade in his chest. To honor the memory of his lost home, he had to ensure he could never return to it. He turned from the swirling abyss, his eyes scanning the laboratory for anything he could use. He was not an engineer, but he was a drifter. He understood instability. He would give the generator a paradox it could not digest. The air in the laboratory grew thick and heavy, congealing around a single point of absolute wrongness before the rift. The shimmering forms of countless phantoms swirled together, their individual whispers merging into a single, deafening roar of static. From that chaos, a figure began to coalesce. It was the Alpha, a being woven from the stolen memories of every scientist and engineer who had died on the station, their collective intellect and final, terrified rage given form. It stood as a shifting monument of human agony, its voice a seismic tremor that shook the very metal under Kaelen's feet. "Join us, Drifter. Your unique frequency will make us whole." The words were not an invitation, but a statement of inevitable fact. Kaelen felt his own energy flare in response, a brilliant, unstable corona of blue light crackling around his form. It was a reflex, a defiance born from watching 2 worlds die. "I have seen what being whole looks like," he answered, his voice steady despite the storm raging within and around him. "It looks like silence." The Alpha moved, not with a step but by rewriting the space between them. A limb of solidified memory and energy lashed out, not to strike him but to embrace him, to absorb his pattern into the collective. Kaelen did not dodge, he met it. He raised his own glitching hand and let the paradox of his existence pour forth. The collision was silent and catastrophic. It was not an explosion of force but of logic. The Alpha, a being of pure, predatory order, met the living contradiction that was Kaelen. His energy was not from this universe, nor was it from the void the phantoms called home. It was a relic of a place that no longer was, a set of physical laws that had been erased. As their energies intertwined, the Alpha's form began to stutter. The stolen faces in its tapestry flickered and screamed, their borrowed coherence shattered by the touch of something truly, fundamentally impossible. "You are error," the Alpha boomed, its voice now laced with a new, discordant note of confusion. "I am memory," Kaelen countered, pushing forward, his own form dissolving at the edges as he fed the entity a truth it could not process. "I am the ghost of a world you will never cleanse." He was overloading it, flooding its singular purpose with the chaotic, beautiful noise of a lost reality. The Alpha recoiled, its magnificent form beginning to unravel at the seams, its certainties turning to dust. But the cost of this victory was being paid in the very substance of his soul. The Alpha's form buckled and screamed, a tapestry of stolen lives coming undone at the seams. Kaelen felt the backlash like a physical blow, a wave of psychic static that threatened to erase his own thoughts. He was losing cohesion, his glitching form bleeding energy into the chaotic storm he had unleashed. This was not a victory, it was a mutual annihilation. In that final, desperate moment, a new understanding crystallized. The phantoms were not just vulnerable to his paradox, they were addicted to it. His unique energy was a poison they could not help but consume. He stopped trying to pull back. Instead, he leaned into the collapse. He focused every shred of his being, every memory of his lost world, into a single, concentrated point of impossible reality. "You want my frequency," he roared, not with his voice but with the totality of his existence. "Have it all." He did not push the energy outward, he let it implode. A sphere of absolute silence bloomed from his chest, a pocket of nothingness that drank the light and sound from the room. It was not an explosion but an erasure. For a handful of heartbeats, the very concept of dimension ceased to exist within that sphere. The Alpha, caught in its center, did not shatter. It delaminated, its cohesive form peeling apart into a cloud of disconnected memories and raw, screaming data. The creature was not destroyed, but fundamentally reset, reduced to its base components without a mind to hold it together. The pulse faded, leaving Kaelen on his knees, his body barely more than a faint outline flickering against the deck. He had won the battle by turning himself into a bomb, but the war was not over. The rift generator still pulsed behind him, its hungry maw wide open. He had used the last of his strength to break one key, but the lock itself remained, and now he had nothing left to turn. Silence returned, thick and heavy as a shroud. The brilliant chaos of the Alpha Phantom was gone, leaving behind only the faint scent of ozone and the memory of a scream. Kaelen knelt on the deck, his own form a translucent echo, the victory feeling hollow and cold. Then the station groaned. It was a deep, gut-whorl sound of metal being tortured to its breaking point. The rift generator, deprived of its controlling intelligence and flooded with the backlash of their battle, began to pulse with a frantic, erratic rhythm. Warning klaxons, silent for so long, blared to life with a shocking, deafening urgency. The floor plates buckled under his knees. A long, jagged crack raced up the far wall, and through it he saw not the station's interior but the cold, unforgiving blackness of open space. His reality pulse had not just defeated the Alpha. It had introduced a fatal instability into a system already teetering on the edge of collapse. The station was coming apart around him, a dying beast shaking off its fleas before its final breath. Conduits on the ceiling exploded in showers of white-hot sparks, casting frantic, strobing shadows. The air grew thin, howling out through the new tears in the hull. He had won the war against the Phantom Collective, but in doing so, he had pulled the final support from a structure already condemned. There was no time for regret, no moment to mourn the life he had just extinguished to save this one. Survival was once again a matter of seconds. He had to move, but to where? The escape pods were likely jettisoned or destroyed in Lyra's final act. The rift generator was a lost cause, a time bomb counting down to zero. He was adrift in a disintegrating metal coffin, the sole survivor of a battle no one would ever know was fought. The choice was no longer about saving a universe, but about finding a single, safe corner of it before the walls finally gave way. A wall of fire erupted down the corridor, consuming the space he had just occupied. Kaelen ran, his glitching form passing through falling debris and shrapnel as the station tore itself to pieces. Every breath was a struggle in the thinning air, his vision spotting at the edges. A final, desperate turn brought him to a secondary hangar bay, its main doors already twisted and sealed by explosive decompression. There, nestled in a reinforced launch tube, was a single, untouched escape pod. Its hatch was sealed, its status lights a calm, steady green amidst the crimson flash of station-wide alerts. He phased through the outer hull, collapsing into the single acceleration couch inside. The console screen flickered to life, displaying a final, automated message. Pod designation Lyra. He had found her personal escape route, the one she had never had the chance to use. His hands, barely solid, fumbled over the launch sequence. With a final, gut-wrenching roar, the station's core surrendered. The viewport filled with a light that was not light, a silent, terrifying expansion as the unstable rift consumed its own anchor. The pod ejected, the force of the launch slamming him back into the couch. For a single, disorienting moment, he saw it all, the entire structure folding in on itself like a piece of paper thrown into a fire before vanishing into a pinprick of unnatural darkness. Then the shockwave hit. It was not a wave of force but of distorted physics, a ripple in the fabric of space-time itself. It slammed into the tiny pod, sending it tumbling end over end into the deep, star-dusted void. The stabilizing thrusters were useless against such a fundamental disturbance. Alarms blared inside the cramped cabin as the pod spun into the absolute blackness between systems, a single, silent leaf caught in a cosmic hurricane. He had escaped the station, the phantoms, and the rift, only to be cast adrift once more. The pod's navigation system was scrambled, its long-range comms dead. He was alive, but he was nowhere, a ghost in a metal coffin tumbling through an endless, silent sea. Silence was the only thing left. It filled the pod, a vast and absolute quiet that pressed in from the infinite black outside the viewport. The ship's emergency power cycled down to its lowest setting, leaving only the dim glow of a single status light and the faint, rhythmic beep of his own life signs on the monitor. Adrift between star systems, with no destination and barely enough energy to keep the air recyclers running, Kaelen had nothing but time, and time was a merciless companion. His mind replayed the final moments on a loop, the brilliant flash of Lyra's sacrifice, the determined set of her jaw before the comms went dead. He had called himself a drifter for so long, a title that once felt like freedom, a promise of infinite horizons. Now it felt like a curse. It was the reason he was always the one left behind, the sole witness to endings, a ghost cursed to remember what everyone else had forgotten. The weight of that title was a physical anchor around his soul, heavier than any planet's gravity. Then a sound cut through the oppressive quiet, a single, clear ping from the pod's rudimentary scanner. It was a weak signal, faint and distant, but it was structured, a repeating pattern cutting through the cosmic white noise. His first thought was a ghost, an echo from the destroyed station, a phantom final whisper. But the frequency was all wrong. This was something new, something unknown. His hand, still faintly shimmering, moved to the console, adjusting the gain. The signal strengthened, a digital heartbeat in the void. It was not a distress call, it was a beacon, and it was calling to him. The signal led to a ship that looked less like a vessel and more like a collection of scars. The Mercy was a hulking patchwork of dented hull plates and mismatched engine nacelles, a testament to a life spent picking at the bones of dead stars. A graceless magnetic claw reached out and pulled his pod into a cavernous, clanging hangar bay that smelled of ozone, grease, and old sweat. The air that washed over him as the hatch hissed open was thick and recycled, a stark contrast to the sterile void he had escaped. A figure stood waiting, silhouetted against the harsh work lights, a heavy wrench dangling from one hand as if it were a natural extension of his arm. The man's eyes, set in a face weathered by hard decisions and harder radiation, scanned Kaelen from head to toe, missing nothing. No ident chip, no ship signature, just a man in a can floating in the absolute middle of nowhere. The captain, Rourke, spat the words like a curse. "You are either the luckiest soul I have ever met, or you are a ghost." Kaelen met the man's probing gaze, letting the silence stretch. He felt the fragile structure of his own story, a tale of dead stations and phantom armies, and knew it was a burden too fantastic to share. In a universe that prized hard facts and tangible credits, mystery was his only viable currency. He offered a slight, non-committal shrug, his form holding a perfect, solid line under the scrutiny. "Some doors are better left closed, Captain." Rourke's lips twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Fine by me. Ghosts work for half pay and don't ask questions. Welcome to the Mercy." The work on the Mercy was a brutal symphony of grinding metal and shouted curses. Kaelen moved through the chaos, a silent note in the cacophony, his glitching nature carefully suppressed. He was just another pair of hands, another ghost in the machine. But when Rourke brought a potential salvage scan to the crew, a blurry sensor reading of a derelict freighter drifting in a dense debris field, Kaelen saw what the others could not. He did not look at the scan itself, he looked at the space around it. To everyone else, the wreck was just another piece of cosmic junk. To Kaelen, it was a subtle distortion in the local dimensional fabric, a faint shimmer of stable reality where everything else was frayed and thin. That pocket of calm, he knew, was where the most intact and therefore most valuable technology would be found. He kept his explanation simple, pointing to a seemingly random coordinate on the star chart. "The density is wrong here. The debris is too uniform. Something solid is holding it all together." The crew was skeptical, but Rourke was a pragmatist. He had nothing to lose but fuel. They plotted the course. When the salvage teams returned, their cargo holds were filled with pristine engine components and sealed data cores, a payday that bought the Mercy another month of life. Rourke just grunted, clapping Kaelen on the shoulder with a force that would have staggered a lesser man. "A lucky guess," he said, but his eyes held a new, calculating respect. Kaelen's payment was a private terminal with limited system access. To the crew, he was studying engineering schematics, learning the trade. In truth, his queries were far more esoteric. He hunted for any whisper of dimensional physics, for references to Project Chimera, for any data on phased energy or theoretical rift mechanics. He was a castaway searching for a map in a world that had forgotten the ocean, using the only currency he had, his own strange perception, to buy himself a chance at understanding the prison he now called home. The terminal screen glowed in the dim light of his quarters, a solitary eye in the dark. Kaelen's fingers, solid for now, moved across the interface, not with a hacker's code, but with a drifter's intuition. He nudged the ship's comm system, letting his perception slide into the gaps between standard frequencies, into the secret rivers of data that flowed beneath the civilized cosmic net. What he found there was not silence, but a chorus of ghosts. The whispers were fragmented, buried under layers of military-grade encryption and academic dismissal. A farmer on a fringe world reported a statue of a three-headed bird that simply appeared in his field one morning, carved from a mineral that defied analysis. Deep space miners told of a derelict ship, its design unlike anything in known archives, its hull cold and empty for 1,000 years, yet its internal clock had stopped only weeks ago. Each report was an island, dismissed as a hoax or a sensor glitch, but together they formed a constellation of wrongness scattered across the galaxy. He was not the only one. The phenomenon was not isolated to that dead station. It was spreading, a slow infection of reality itself. Then he saw it, a data packet woven through the whispers like a single, stark thread of black in a gray tapestry. It was a message encrypted with a key that resonated with the same dissonant frequency as his own glitching cells. He did not need to break the code. He simply let the pattern recognize him. The words appeared on his screen, clean and simple and terrifying. "The cascade has begun. Find the architect." The words landed in the quiet of his room with the force of a physical blow. His personal exile, his lonely war against the phantoms, had just been recast. It was not a singular tragedy anymore. It was a symptom of a universal disease, a chain reaction of collapsing realities. Someone, somewhere, understood what was happening. Someone had given this apocalypse a name, and they had issued a command: find the architect. The search for a way home was over. He was no longer a refugee. He was a messenger, and the message was for him. The coordinates pulled from that encrypted signal pointed to a single, rust-colored dot on the star charts. Vixos Prime was not a world, but a monument to entropy, a planet-sized scrapyard where the carcasses of 10,000 ships went to be picked clean. The Mercy descended through a choking atmosphere thick with the smell of oxidized metal and ionized waste, setting down on a landing pad that groaned under its weight. The air hummed with the constant, grinding music of crushers and plasma torches. Towering mountains of shattered hulls and dead engines stretched to a smog-choked horizon, a graveyard of forgotten journeys. This was the domain of the Junkyard King. They found him not on a throne, but perched on the engine block of a derelict star cruiser, a man whose girth was matched only by the sheer force of his presence. He was polishing a piece of alien circuitry with a greasy rag, his eyes sharp and impossibly bright, flicking over Rurk before settling on Kaelen. He saw past the standard issue crew gear, past the carefully maintained solidity. He saw the ghost in the machine. "You are looking for something that cannot be found," the king said, his voice a low rumble like shifting scrap. "People come here for parts, for secrets, for revenge. You are looking for a story." Kaelen said the only word that mattered: the architect. The Junkyard King's laughter was a short, sharp bark that echoed off the metal canyons. "The architect, he is a fairy tale for starry-eyed physicists and desperate drifters. A ghost who supposedly built the first engine that could chew through the walls of reality itself. They say he glimpsed the blueprint of the multiverse and went mad from the beauty of it. No one has seen him in 100 years. He leaned forward, the amusement vanishing from his face, replaced by a predatory keenness. But I know someone who does not think he is a myth, someone who is hunting him with a fervor that borders on religion. They pass through here sometimes, asking the same questions you are. They never stay long, and they never, ever take no for an answer. They call themselves the Anchorites, and they believe the architect is not just real, but that he is a cosmic criminal who must be brought to justice for the crime of creation itself. The Junkyard King's coordinates led them into the heart of a spinning maze of stone and ice. The Shadow Port wasn't a place you found on any official chart. It was a secret, a tumor growing in the blind spot of a dozen different empires, hidden within the chaotic currents of a dense asteroid field. The Mercy slid between tumbling mountains of rock, its navigation computer screaming protests until Rurk shut it off, flying on instinct and the king's cryptic directions. The port itself was a jagged scar across the face of a planetoid, its docks little more than magnetic clamps and pressurized tunnels grafted onto the rock. The air in the main concourse was thick with the smell of recycled oxygen, unwashed bodies, and the sharp, metallic tang of illegal tech. It was a bazaar of shadows where deals were made in glances and paid for in secrets. Kaelen moved through the crowd, his senses on a razor's edge. This was a place where being a ghost should have been an advantage, but he felt more visible than ever. The ambush came not with a shout, but with a whisper of displaced air. They melted from the gloom between two vendor stalls, three figures clad in form-fitting armor the color of deep space. Their movements were synchronized, utterly silent, and they carried weapons that hummed with a familiar, sickening energy. Phased tech, rifles that didn't fire projectiles but pulses of localized dimensional instability. They didn't need to aim. One fired, and the energy bolt phased straight through a stack of crates to slam into Kaelen's shoulder. It wasn't a burn or an impact. It was an unraveling. His entire arm flickered violently, the pain a white-hot scream as his very molecular structure was threatened. He staggered back, crashing against a wall. The lead hunter stepped forward, her face obscured by a sleek, featureless helm. Her voice was synthesized, flat, and utterly devoid of emotion. The convergence seeks the drifter. You will come with us. The name meant nothing to him, but their purpose was crystal clear. They weren't scavengers or bounty hunters, they were a military. Their technology was refined, a polished version of the chaotic power the phantoms wielded. They didn't want to erase him, they wanted to contain him. To study him, he was no longer just a key to a phantom collective or a message for a mythical architect. He was a specimen, and the Convergence had just declared itself the collection agency. The phased tech bolt had left a wound that refused to heal, a persistent shimmer of instability crawling up his arm. Consciousness returned not to the sterile hum of a med bay, but to the soft scent of stone and burning herbs. He lay on a simple cot in a chamber carved from living rock, the walls adorned with intricate, flowing diagrams that looked less like science and more like a map of a nervous system made of starlight. An old woman sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap. Her eyes held a depth that seemed to swallow the flickering candlelight. "You have been drifting through the cracks in the floorboards," she said, her voice a soft rasp like wind over sand. "But you never thought to ask who built the house." Her name was Elara, and her people were the keepers of the weave. They were not warriors or scientists, but scholars of existence itself, a reclusive order that had long watched the fabric of reality from a distance. They called it the weave, a single, vast tapestry connecting all things, all moments, all possibilities. "Your arrival here was not an accident, Kaelen," she continued, her gaze steady on his glitching arm. "The phantoms, the convergence, even the architect you seek, they are all symptoms. The weave is under a terrible strain, a sickness that is causing it to fray. And you, child, are not a mistake, you are a reaction. The universe is trying to balance a scale." She explained that his ability to drift, his very nature as a paradox, was not a flaw. It was an immune response, an antibody generated by reality itself to fight the infection of the cascade. Where the phantoms sought to erase anomalies and the convergence sought to control them, he was something new, something the weave had created to heal itself. "You were born from a dying universe," she said, her words landing with the weight of a cosmic truth. "Your pain, your loss, it encoded you with a unique signature, a resonance that can stabilize the tears. You are not a ghost, you are a suture." For the first time since his world vanished, Kaelen felt a purpose that was not born from desperation or vengeance. He was not a refugee or a weapon. He was a necessary part of a system he never knew existed. The question was no longer about finding a way home, but about learning how to heal the very fabric of a wounded cosmos. Could a man who had spent his life running finally learn how to stand and mend? The cascade is not a storm you can outrun, Kaelen. It is the floorboards giving way beneath your feet. Elara's voice was low and grave, her finger tracing one of the luminous diagrams on the stone wall. It depicted not stars or galaxies, but a vast, interconnected web, and at its very center, a single, frayed thread was slowly unraveling the entire tapestry. The first tear was not an accident, it was an act of supreme arrogance. "The being you call the architect," she continued, "he did not merely seek to travel between worlds. He sought to own them. He built the first true interdimensional engine, a device designed not to observe but to extract. He punched a hole into a neighboring reality and began siphoning its fundamental energy, its very quantum potential, to fuel his own ambitions. Think of it as a man who, to light his own home, sets fire to his neighbors. He gets his light for a time, but he never stopped to consider that all the houses are connected, that they share the same foundation. That first act of theft created a weakness, a flaw in the very structure of the weave, and like a crack in a dam, the pressure of existence itself began to widen it. Realities that were never meant to touch began to bleed into one another. The natural laws of one universe would infect another, causing stars to die in impossible ways or life to evolve into horrific, unstable forms. The cascade is this chain reaction of collapsing realities, each one falling and pulling the next one closer to the edge. The phantoms you face, they are not the cause. They are the fever, the weave's own desperate attempt to burn out the infection by erasing the damaged cells. And the convergence, those silent hunters, they are the surgeons who have decided the only way to save the patient is to amputate the entire limb. They believe that by controlling or destroying every anomaly, every drifter like you, they can contain the spread, but they are wrong. You cannot stop a flood by building a wall. You can only divert the water or find a way to repair the breach. The architect's original sin has become a cosmic plague, and we are all now living in its shadow. So you see, your journey was never a random flight. The weave, in its own vast and silent wisdom, drew you here. It created a living antibody in a man who has already witnessed the end of one world, because only such a witness could possibly understand the stakes of losing all the others. The coordinates felt cold in his mind, a string of numbers that described a place that should not exist. Ilara called it the architect's last redoubt, a laboratory hidden not on a planet or a moon, but folded into a tiny, self-contained pocket of reality. He sought a cure for the disease he created, she had told him, her ancient eyes holding a glimmer of something that was not quite hope. Perhaps you are it. The words echoed in the silence of his quarters aboard the Mercy. He was not just following a trail anymore. He was walking toward its end, preparing to meet the ghost who had cast the first stone that shattered his world. The man who had lit the fire was now trapped in his own burning house. What do you say to such a person? What deal can you possibly strike with the architect of the apocalypse? The journey would require him to leave the Mercy, to drift one last time into the unknown. He stood before the small viewport, watching the stars streak by, and made his final preparations. He was not going as a soldier or a supplicant, but as a living argument, a paradox made flesh sent to reason with a god in chains. The fate of the weave now hinged on a conversation between a cure and its cause, in a room at the edge of everything. The laboratory was a tomb of perfect silence, a stark, white chamber where the air itself felt stilled and artificial. No dust motes danced in the sterile light, no hum of machinery broke the absolute quiet. The architect was not here. He had left behind only a ghost of his genius, a single, elegant device resting on a central pedestal. It was called the reality anchor, and its purpose was etched into a crystalline date, a slate beside it. Kaelen's eyes scanned the schematics, his mind grappling with the devastating simplicity of its function. The anchor would not just close the local rift. It would broadcast a stabilizing frequency across the entire dimensional spectrum, reinforcing the weave and sealing every breach permanently. It would end the cascade. But such a universal fix demanded a universal price. The anchor required a constant, paradoxical energy source to maintain its hold, a living battery of impossible physics. A drifter, him, his own glitching nature, the very thing that made him an anomaly, was the only key that could turn this final lock. As he absorbed this truth, a hologram flickered to life above the pedestal. The figure of an old man, gaunt and weary, looked out with eyes that had seen too much. His voice was calm, stripped of pride or madness, filled only with a profound and final regret. To save the many, one must be willing to be the lock on the door, the architect said. I built the key, but I lack the unique substance to turn it. My legacy is a world on fire, and my final act can only be to offer the one tool that can extinguish it. I am sorry, traveler, for the burden I have created for you. The hologram faded, leaving Kaelen alone in the pristine silence with the weight of infinity on his shoulders. He could walk away, he could return to the Mercy, to the gritty, tangible reality of Rourke's crew, and spend whatever life he had left drifting through a slowly healing cosmos. It would be a life, but it would be a life lived with the knowledge that he had left the job unfinished, that he had chosen his own fleeting freedom over the permanent security of every other soul in existence. The anchor was not a weapon or a tool. It was a throne, and to sit upon it was to become a permanent part of the cosmic architecture, a silent guardian fused to the very fabric of reality, forever holding the line against the void. It was the ultimate act of standing still. For a man who had spent his entire existence running, it was the most terrifying prospect imaginable. The choice was not a moment of grand drama, but a quiet acceptance. Kaelen reached out, his glitching hand meeting the cool, impossibly smooth surface of the reality anchor. There was no flash of light, no violent surge of power. Instead, a deep, resonant hum began, a single, pure note that seemed to originate from the center of his own being. He felt it leave him first, a wave of stabilizing energy flowing out from the laboratory, a silent tide washing through the cracks in reality. Across the cosmos, the Phantom Collective, a chorus of agonized static, simply fell silent, their purpose fulfilled at last. The frayed edges of the weave began to knit themselves back together, the bleeding stopped. On the bridge of the Mercy, Rourke stared at his sensor display, watching impossible energy signatures simply vanish from the star charts, replaced by a steady, calm reading he had never seen before. It felt, for the first time in a long time, like peace. Kaelen watched from an impossible vantage, his consciousness now woven into the fabric of space-time itself. He saw the stars not as distant points of light, but as the vibrant, living nodes of the great tapestry he now safeguarded. The endless running was over. The drifting is over, he thought, and the universe itself seemed to listen. Now we rebuild. He had traded his freedom for a foundation, his solitude for a silent stewardship. The man who was once a lost soul had become the anchor that held all of reality fast, his legend not written in history books, but etched into the silent, enduring laws of physics, a permanent guardian in the quiet between the stars.